All right. Good morning. Bonjour, hello, gwe atalahai. Welcome everyone to our monthly entrepreneur coffee break on March 27th, 2025. My name is Carol Spicer, and I'm the owner of Spicer Facilitation. I'm very pleased to have you all with us today. I know we've got some new folks joining, some folks we haven't seen for a little while, so awesome to bring us back together. I want to thank members of this community who suggested today's topic. And I want to thank Billy for being a gracious host guest to come in and talk about this topic of tariffs. My husband's been firing me off all kinds of news articles this morning, Billy, about
Oh,
about tariffs and trying to keep me in the loop. So I have something I could ask you about a little bit later after your presentation. So for those that haven't been with us for a while or haven't attended before, the Entrepreneur Coffee Break is a virtual networking opportunity to bring people from different parts of the province together that we don't always get an opportunity to hike down the highway to meet somebody for coffee. We started this as a pilot in January 2020 for 3 months, which brought us to March 2020. We all know what happened in March 2020. So we carried on virtually. And so we are now entering into our fifth year of this community. So grateful to you folks that still want it to go on. As long as you want to attend and as long as we can get some fine folks that are willing to have conversations with us, then I don't mind hosting it every month. So thank you so much for attending, everyone. So I am going to ask for some quick introductions. I'll leave Billy to last. He is our guest. However, just to give him an idea of who we have in the room for the conversation, I'm going to go in order of the way I see you on my screen, which means Carla, you're first, and Janice, you're next.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Carol. Carla May. I am a business growth advisor with NLO, which is Newfoundland and Labrador Organization of Women Entrepreneurs. And I'm excited to be here again this morning. Thanks, Carol.
Excellent. Thank you. And perhaps tell folks where you're joining from. So Carla's in Corner Brook. I'll tell her that one for her. Janice, you're up next, and then it's going to be Terry Lynn.
Okay. Hi, I'm Janice Evans. I'm one of the owners of the Roost at York Harbor. I'm speaking to you uh, to you today from Lark Harbor because we're closed for the winter, but looking forward to another season. And I'm glad to be here and hear all about tariffs. I hope.
Excellent. Thank you. Terry Lynn and then Karen.
Good morning, everybody. I am co-owner of Robin's Family Farm in Deer Lake, and I'm joining you from, well, obviously, Deer Lake.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. Karen and then Crystal.
Good morning. My name is Karen Green. I'm a business navigator with the Government of Newfoundland. I help small businesses move through the regulatory processes within government or any new or upcoming businesses. They usually reach out to us and say, where do we start? And then we send them off to the NLOs and the CBDCs and things like that for assistance.
Excellent. And Karen is definitely making the networking rounds. We keep crossing paths at different events, which is fantastic.
Yes. And I'm in the Corner Brook area, but we do service the whole province.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Crystal and then Samantha.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal West, and I'm owner-operator of Excite Zone here in Gander. I also sit on the Chamber of Commerce here in Gander, so I'm representing two entities this morning. And I look forward to hearing some information that is not a meme on Facebook.
Very true. Very true.
And I'm in Gander.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. Samantha and then Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha O'Brien. I'm with Atlantic Edge Credit Union. I'm based out of our Deer Lake branch, but we have 16 branches throughout the province.
Yes. You're going into all those little nooks and crannies
All
that
those
everyone else
little
is
nooks and
leaving.
crannies. Yes, we're definitely expanding every year. Seems to be a new expansion. So
Excellent. All right, and Kelly.
I'm Kelly Len. I'm here in beautiful snowy Pasadena.
And I am the owner of Bees Knees Events and Marketing, and also I am a CDP with WRDC. So
Excellent. Welcome. All right, Billy, that's your room. I'll turn to you.
Thanks. Really good to hear from everyone. Really nice to see you. I know I've met some of you before. Others I haven't. So my name is Billy Newell. I wear a few different hats. I'll try and give a quick overview on all those. So Carol reached out to me, of course, asking if there'd be anyone interested in talking about tariffs. And I think Carol's approach, which I think was a good one, was to try to, like dememify the idea or like the discussion of tariffs if we could. And so she had asked about kind of around Grenfell campus to see if there was anyone who would chat about it. And I kind of told her, like, I'm not an economist, Carol, but I'm usually the one who teaches our international business course for our undergrads at Grenfell campus for our Bachelor of Business Administration program. So I've been teaching that course since 2017. So usually whenever it's not even just, it's an interest of mine, of course, to keep on top of like kind of the global affairs of what's going on. But especially when I'm teaching that course, I'm always having to stay on top of obviously what's happening in international trade. We cover a lot of that in the particular course. My background in kind of like the international arena, we'll say, mostly comes from my master's degree, actually, where I did one in international retail marketing, which of course focuses on retail operations and trade and establishing retail operations in other nations. And so it's been a really good kind of background there. And I did that program at the University of Surrey in the UK. So I'm still a faculty member at Grenfell, and also I'm the director for our Navigate Entrepreneurship Center. Some of you may have met me through there. We're essentially established on the West Coast and like to promote entrepreneurship on the West Coast of Newfoundland and also help entrepreneurs with high potential in trying to start or grow their businesses. I think finally, I'll just say that I'm a co-business owner here on the West Coast and a business owner that does rely a little bit on supplies that come from US companies. And so also in a position where the tariffs are impacting the costs of our supplies for the particular business. And so I do like to think that I'm coming at it from an angle of trying to, parse apart the truth and the lies, trying to keep calm about it all, but of course, someone whose business is directly getting impacted by it as well. And of course, all of us are consumers here, and there might be some impact on prices and the economy for us as consumers as well. So I like to think that I'm coming at it from a couple of different angles. I found it challenging just to put this presentation together, but only because usually when it's a group, I try to get a sense of what everyone would like to learn. It's sometimes I get a group with diverse kind of knowledge on a particular topic. So I'm going to try to start sort of at the basics today, but also I won't be talking for very long in terms of like a presentation, but I will kind of open it up for questions on what people might have and to start like a discussion. And then I can weigh in on my view on things and answer any questions that people might have about it. So I'll talk about some of the basics for the first little bit and then open it up for questions. And we can dive into some issues more in a more deeper way if people have some questions that are, we'll say, like more, not necessarily advanced, but more detailed than what I've covered.
I think that sounds great, Billy. Thanks.
Awesome. So I might not have all the answers. I'm not an economist, so this is sort of something I keep on top of for my teaching and for my own interest, as I said. So I'll let you know if there's something that I don't particularly know, but I'll be happy to kind of, if there's something I don't know, I'll be happy to look it up and just kind of send Carol or the answers along or my thoughts on at a later point. This is obviously something that's changing really, really quickly as well. Like the uncertainty, I think, is probably the thing that's weighing on the most people's minds for the fact that, like, is this tariff still in place? Is it not? Yesterday, new announcement on auto tariffs or tariffs on products in the automotive manufacturing sector. And so this is, of course, a situation that's evolving really, really quickly, and trying to find and parse through the statistics that are updated and all the events that are updated is also pretty difficult. But I know that So that's on the one hand hard to stay on top of, but I'll try and drill down to paint a picture of what matters there as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now in that case, and I will then start with one question from you. I think, can you see my screen? Sometimes when I go in presenter mode, this is okay.
Yep,
Sometimes
that's perfect.
presenter mode can fool things up. I've called it simply a crash course. The first thing I'd like to know is what you want to know. Would anyone like to, and this might be something I can work into my presentation or something we can address after, but I'll let everyone start with letting me know if there's anything in particular they'd like me to cover or talk about. And I'll make note of that.
I think for me, Billy, it's what are they? You hear tariffs, you hear taxes, you hear trade deficits and free trade, and I think of them as a tax is probably in my basic head, but I don't really know if that's exactly what they are.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Thank you. Anyone else have a thought? I will talk about that. I will talk about those, and I can clarify some of those things. Samantha, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was. So I'm actually one of our commercial lenders here. So very similar to Carol, I know just enough about tariffs to kind of be dangerous sometimes, but I love to know more about how it affects specifically the industries within our province, and how like that's going to overall, how it's going to affect the businesses from that standpoint.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we can talk about that. Anyone else? In that case,
I think perhaps too, Billy, just jump in. We've heard a lot in the media, building on what Samantha said. We've heard a lot in the media about the seafood industry, and the big seafood fair that just went on in Boston and so on. But are there other industries that you think might be adversely affected compared to others?
Sure. Yes, I've heard the tone at the seafood industry thing has certainly changed this year than what it did last year, but that's kind of more from anecdotal evidence for me. But yeah, you could certainly talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just thinking of some of the people that are on this call, some are in the tourism industry. We have a lot of support agency folks on the phone that support all of us in businesses. So I think if they have a sense of which of their clients might be impacted would be good to know.
Okay, great. Thanks. So in that case, I can get started and try to cover some of these things. So I was going to cover what tariffs are, essentially, a little bit. It's hard to talk about tariffs without talking about trade deficits and surpluses and things like that. So I will mention that at least for a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're imposing tariffs. That might be something that we need to kind of highlight. And what are the potential impacts on Canadian small businesses? And I can get into some that are particularly on Newfoundland small businesses. When I came into this, I was trying to take sort of like a business-focused approach to like how will it impact the businesses here. But I'll probably also talk about some of the more broad things here, and then some people might be able to make some links to their particular industry. But I know, of course, from the Newfoundland perspective, we're pretty heavy in some particular industries, and there has been some predictions about what those impacts might be. But again, there are also predictions at this point, which I'll talk about. So what can we do about them? What can we do with the tariffs at this point? Mostly from the point of view of, again, Canadian and Newfoundland small businesses. What are our options there? So I don't know if anyone had a little peek at the answer when I wasn't in presentation mode, but I'm going to start off with a multiple choice question. What is a trade deficit? So is it when a country exports more goods and services than it imports? When a country imports more goods and services than it exports? When a country has an equal balance of imports and exports, or when a country stops trading with other nations? Anyone want to be brave and put an answer in the chat? Are they able to do that, Carol? Or they can yell it out if you like. A, B, C, or D? don't have any fancy polling stuff. I didn't want to have too many more technical things happening here. There's already enough potential for something to go wrong when it's me doing a
This is
video
true.
call like this.
I threw my answer in chat. Everyone else can put theirs in if they wish.
Couple brave souls saying B. I think Janice
I'm saying B.
and Janice saying B. Starting to see a little consensus here. You would be right. So it's when a country imports more goods and services than it exports. So you can essentially think of a company or a country that is having to buy more than essentially what it's selling abroad. So it's not necessarily that they're, of course, they're probably selling a lot of things domestically, but this trade deficit can say a lot of things about kind of a country's economic position. Trade deficits, they kind of sound necessarily like a bad thing. They're not necessarily a bad thing. So a country, when we have some descriptions of like a trade deficit being, for example, in the case of the Trump administration, there's often a discussion about, the United States sending money to Canada and subsidizing Canada because of a trade deficit. The number that keeps getting pulled out there is like 200 billion, and no one really knows where that number is coming from. There's like a couple of guesses as to like how that number has been calculated, but that's not real. There's no real data at this point to back that up. But it's not the case that, of course, Canadian or American companies in America are just sending money Canada's way and like subsidizing us. It's like any business. It would be the equivalent of a business owner, you being a business owner here, and a customer coming in and making a big purchase and saying, look at that, I just paid for your vacation next month or something like that. And it's like, I just gave you the money. It's like, well, yes, I mean, of course, it was nice that you made the purchase. We appreciate it. Hopefully, there's some profit that can come off that. But there's a few things going on here, right? Like A, not all the money goes in my pocket because there's cost associated with that. And B, you got the thing that you bought, right? You got some value out of that. And so it's not necessarily that, the United States are sending money Canada's way. They're receiving goods and services, some really, really crucial to the functioning of their economy. And so these trade deficits aren't necessarily bad. The other thing to note, if trade deficits grow between the United States and Canada, for example, so if the United States is experiencing a trade deficit, especially in short terms, if it's not so much structural trade deficit, it can almost signal that an economy is growing. So you can picture the United States as a customer, right? If a customer is buying more from you because they have more money to spend, it's because they're growing and they're not necessarily producing all the things that they might need for a bunch of different reasons. And so they have to grow. And so there's a bunch of different ways to look at trade deficits. It's a complicated number to interpret. It's not necessarily always a bad thing. So when we talk about Canada-US trade relationships, kind of at its current state, it is probably one of the most complicated, interconnected trade relationships in the world along a border that has been largely, unprotected, as they say. So it's a really intertwined relationship, which makes this whole issue of tariffs really, really complicated, and especially in certain sectors. But I did want to ask one question, and of course, this is a bit of I'll give you a hint, like it can be a little bit of a trick question, but I wanted to know like your thoughts. Like, does the United States have a trade deficit with Canada? And I wanted to hear what people's thoughts were on that, or if anyone had a clear answer. Well, it requires some bravery, perhaps.
From what I've heard, the short answer is yes. However, like you said, how you calculate it, because then they say if you take out something like energy, no. And so I think the positioning that's coming across in the media from the US is yes, like you say, they feel they're giving us money. But if you really drill down to it, it's not as cut and dried as that. That's what I've heard.
That's exactly right. That's as exactly even by pointing out with some of the industry. So you've got a really good understanding of that, I think. So essentially, if we look at the overall trade deficit, there is one. In 2024, it was somewhere to the tune of about $100 billion, meaning that, we sold more goods to the United States than they sold to us by about the tune of 100 billion. But if you start looking at this like sector by sector and like drilling down through those numbers and really seeing what this means, it does get a lot more complicated. So as Carol, as you mentioned, if you take out energy, the trade relationship is almost essentially balanced. So energy is the real thing, and a lot of commodities, we might say, is the real thing that the United States relies on Canada for, and that's really the source of the trade deficit. When you take that out, the trade relationship between the United States and Canada is relatively balanced. If we look at a couple of sub-industries, I guess, among that, if we look at auto manufacturing, for example, the US enjoys a trade surplus with Canada, which means Canada is in the deficit. So essentially, the United States is selling us more cars, especially finished product cars, than we're selling to them. So this is and the reason we highlight this particular relationship is because it's one of the most, it's kind of what has been called as like the poster child for this kind of bilateral trade relationship. Some people may have heard in the news that, cars will cross, and the manufacturing of a car and the parts will cross the border several times before we actually get a finished product. And that's true. It can be 7 to 8 times. So it can be really complicated to try to track where the origin of the goods were and where the finished product comes. But generally speaking, the trade relationship with Canada, we've been in a deficit to the United States. So that means the United States has been in a surplus to Canada. They sell us more cars than we sell to them, more finished cars. When we look at services, which includes things like tourism, the United States is also in a surplus. So anyone here in like the tourism industry, it means that their surplus to Canada in 2024 was around $15 billion. That's the surplus, which means that we have basically more Canadians visiting and getting services to the United States than the United States is doing here. So essentially we are, and that kind of, in some ways, I don't know if it makes sense, but maybe as a destination, I mean, the United States is a lot more famous than Canada as a tourism destination. We've got a lot of people that sort of live near the border. Most Canadians live near the border. And these types of things like services count trips, like when people make cross-border trips to do a lot of their shopping, there's a lot of other services that are involved with that. And so the United States actually has a trade surplus there. The other thing I might say is that when we talk about what this deficit actually is, it's actually quite small when the United States actually looks at it from all of their different trade partners. The United States' biggest trade deficit is actually with Mexico, and it's actually quite a large margin. And when you think about it, that makes sense, because Mexico, they also manufacture a lot of vehicles. They have a lot of manufacturing in other sectors. And so they send a lot of that to the United States, but they're not quite, as you might say, like they're not quite as affluent of a market as what Canada might be. And so there's not a lot of goods that kind of go the other way across the border from the United States to Mexico. So they've got a really big deficit with Mexico. The deficit with Canada is a long ways down the list of their trading partners and their deficits, and only represents 4% of their overall trade deficit. So we're dealing with really, really small numbers here. So when I get into why these trade wars are happening, the economic rationale isn't always there or backed up by the numbers all the time. The only thing I'll say about this, I guess the last thing, is the energy thing. When you say we take that out, the United States has kind of recognized that it's really dependent on Canadian energy, which is why at first the tariffs were not as high, or still not that high for Canadian energy, lower at like 10%. We send a lot of unprocessed oil and other energy products to the United States. They do a lot of the refining of our products. They rely on a lot of that energy because they don't have quite the same resources down there, and they've got a lot of demand for energy through lots of different things, including their like tech companies, which is the biggest kind of pull on energy. And these refineries and things like that, they need, it's not easy just to try to find another feedstock or another supply of oil. They can't just switch that suddenly. Again, so they realize, and I think this is why that has been cut. They realize that that they have this reliance for energy on Canada and Canadian products. The other places they can really get it are Mexico in North America are like Mexico and Venezuela. And if they were to go to Mexico for the energy, they would widen that trade deficit again. And they have other tariffs already imposed on Venezuela for other reasons, which they'd have to lift. So they realize that they're reliant on a couple of these things. I won't get into that much more, but I think, again, it's a complicated trade relationship. And when you drill down the numbers, the deficit is not quite so clear as to say, yes, there's a deficit, no, there's a deficit, and what that actually means for the whole economic picture. So I want to bring this down then around talking about tariffs in particular. So tariffs, I'm going to kind of use a story to talk about tariffs, about a fictional business called Berry Delight. And we'll pretend that this business is in Newfoundland, right? So we're all here in Newfoundland. So let's pretend this is kind of like a craft jam marmalade producer based here somewhere. And as you can see, there's a bunch of different ingredients that might go in these jams, and you can probably tell from the picture, a couple of these don't come from Canada, and we'll pick on the oranges in particular. So let's pretend that we have a jam producer who has to import oranges from the United States. Most of their oranges come from Florida. They use it in their jam, and then they sell the jam. And then let's pretend that this jam can be sold in the local market in Newfoundland and Labrador, but also it might be that we'll call the owner Sarah of Berry Delight. I forgot to mention. We'll say Sarah. She also exports some of her product potentially to the United States as well, to buyers and to grocery stores there. So if we're talking about a tariff, we have a situation here where we've got oranges that are in the United States, and we've got our jam producer, which is in Canada. And let's just pretend that Sarah and Berry Delight have to purchase $1,000 worth of Florida organic oranges to produce her jam. And she wants them to be organic because it's a really good, really high quality business, no pesticides and things like that. And we know that, of course, the goods then have to cross the border to get into Canada, and then, of course, to get into Newfoundland. So when we talk about a tariff is a tax. So a tariff is just a type of tax. Essentially, when that good crosses the border, it is Canada that's choosing, when we talk about tariffs that's making our goods more expensive for Canadians, it's actually the Canadian government that's imposing this tariff on on a product that's originating from the United States. And so at this particular point in time, Canada is imposing a 25% tariff on these oranges. And so again, the choice of who's imposed this particular tariff is the choice of the Canadian government. And that is on the product coming in. This is also what we might call an ad valorem import tariff. An ad valorem import tariff just means that it's a tariff based on the value of the goods that are crossing the border. So in this case, if we've got $1,000 of Florida oranges and we've got a 25% import tariff, that means the Canadian government is collecting an extra 25% on top of the $1,000 that you've paid your supplier of Florida oranges. And so so Sarah's purchase turned from $1,000. I've put it all in Canadian to make it simple. Usually you would pay US dollars and do the conversion, etc. But now she has to pay $1,250 for those oranges. And so obviously this leaves Sarah in a difficult situation where she has an extra $250 that she has to pay for these oranges, and she's left in a position where she either has to let that extra money eat into her profit margin, or she has to raise the prices for her customers. That's really like if she's purchasing from that supplier, those are essentially her two choices. There is a tariff finder. The reason I know that, you'll see that underneath there's this little bracket. I will show you a little bit about that if I can get, hang on now. I'll get it up here instead. Oh boy, this thing is tough. Sorry. I'll move this. Sorry, guys. There we go. There's a link on that slide that goes to like a tariff finder. So essentially what you would do is every good that goes across the border has what we call a code that follows a harmonized system code. We call it like an HS code. And we use these HS codes to find out like what tariffs apply to our products. So this is a classification system that determines the tariff rate. And you can use this tool from Export Development Canada if you want to say, look, I'm importing something from, oh my goodness, I'm importing something from the United States, and the product is oranges. Whoops. And you can see, we'll say they're fresh oranges, of course. These, we only deal with the freshest of fresh oranges. And we can also see that we have to specify a little bit more: citrus fruit, oranges, certified organic, or other. So I'm saying, of course, these are certified organic. And you can see what comes up is it'll actually come up what the duty is. At this point, we can say it's like 25% because of the recent surtax order. Normally, it has been free, but now, of course, we put this up to 25% is what it's saying. So from this particular tool, we can say that our Canadian imposed tax rate at this point is 25%. So that's how I found that. And that was the HS code that applied here.
Billy, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if Canada is imposing this additional 250 that Sarah must absorb, who does she pay that to? Does she pay that to Canada, or does she pay that to the supplier?
She pays that to Canada. So Canada is the one who imposes the tariff. And the importer, the one who's buying the oranges, so Sarah, she's the one who has to pay it. It's not the supplier, because this is being imposed at the Canadian border. So this is a tax, like what you said, it's a special type of tax that's imposed by the Canadian government. And so what's happening is when these goods are coming across the border, Canada is, in some respects, collecting more tariff tax revenue. The Canadian government is.
So kind of like you collect HST and remit that, sort of.
Sort of. It's like that, except you don't get to, you pay that $250
Right.
upon receiving the product, which
Okay.
HST is, of course, there's a lag there. You collect
Yeah,
it and remit.
yeah.
But yeah, you are essentially paying that to the Canadian government. Now, of course, that kind of makes people often, I was going to get into this a little bit later, that makes people often feel a little bit, there's mixed feelings there. It's like, well, hang on, I thought like the United States was the bad guy here, so to speak, which I don't believe they are. I think it's, of course, an administration. America, I think we should, in some ways, still stay calm. They're still a really, really important trading partner. I generally really like Americans. So, it is the Canadian government's decision to impose this tariff. There's still a high proportion of small businesses in Canada that support that tariff. And because we've been talking about this as a response to what the United States initially imposed on tariffs on their end. Because if I go from the other side of the equation here, let's pretend that Sarah, of course, she sells jam domestically, but she might also have some buyers back in the United States. And we've got a really big problem here now where the United States, that finished jam, we're not talking about oranges anymore, that's got to cross the US border, the US-Canada border back into the United States to those buyers. And now the United States has another tariff, because now that product is passing the border again as a value-added product, now it's jam. Their tariff is actually 28.5% on bottled citrus jam. So if I go back to our tariff finder, I can do the same thing. I'm exporting from Canada to the United States. I can search for jam. We'll call it homogenized. Of course, you want to find the best description of your product. I picked the wrong HS code, didn't I? I did this once to be like, oh, I will, citrus fruit, there we go. Citrus fruit, and then I picked citrus fruit jam, orange marmalade. So orange marmalade originally had a duty of 3.5%, which they call the general rate. And then they've imposed an additional 25% on that plus the general rate. So generally this is additive, which means that if we had to add these two things together, the way we should read this, and so the duty of 3.5% on top of the 25% means that we actually have a tariff now in the United States of 28.5%. So they're imposing just slightly higher tariffs on bottled jam than we are on oranges. And so now, of course, if a buyer wants to buy this jam, they've had to essentially, the price for them, it could essentially be 28% higher. The business who sells them the jam has to make that decision again. Do we raise the price to, or do we eat that? Do we have that margin eat into our, or do we have that eat into our margin essentially? And that's a difficult choice. That makes this jam seem much more expensive than a American producer of jam who's selling it to their own buyers. So essentially these tariffs are making Canadian goods really expensive. It's making US jam a lot cheaper. And so it's not only is it hurting Sarah's domestic customers because she has to decide if she wants to charge them extra, it's really hurting her exports to the United States because now our goods are a lot more expensive. When we look domestically, we have this situation where the effect on consumers, depending on what she chooses, are going to be really different, and the effect on the government is going to be really different. So if Sarah decides that she's going to absorb that $250 and she's not going to charge more to her customers, she's going to earn less profit. This is a really complicated balance, but if there's lower profit, there's going to be an impact on what the government takes as in your income tax revenue, right? If you have lower profit, you're not going to pay as much tax. So even though the government's collecting this import duty, this tariff, businesses might be making less money if enough of them decide that they want to absorb that cost. They're going to collect, it doesn't necessarily balance out. It's a very complicated relationship, but they might not collect as much. They might not collect any more taxes anyway. It's just coming from different places. Of course, if Sarah decides she wants to raise the price and enough businesses decide they're going to raise these prices, we know that the fear is that this is going to lead to inflation because the prices are just going to go up. We're essentially just increasing the cost of doing businesses and prices go up for all products. And this is, of course, something that both countries are worried about. The United States is probably worried about this a lot more than Canada is, especially with the energy that they depend on because they don't want gasoline prices and things like that to go up, which would affect everything. So it's this really complicated situation where it can make everything more expensive and it might not even really necessarily impact the tax revenue of the United States. Having said that, there are a few things that this choice is difficult for small businesses, but I guess there's a few things that we can potentially do. I can stop there if there's any questions just for a second. Of course, I'm talking longer than I thought. That always happens. Samantha O'Brien.
Okay.
Yes, Samantha.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I understand like when the oranges were crossing the border, Sarah's company had to absorb the cost. So if she sells to the US directly to her customers, how is that 28.5% charged to her customers across the border?
I've simplified this version, but I guess it depends. If she's selling them, let's say direct to consumers, so let's like pretend those people that we see in my slide on the other side are individual customers. So let's say like Samantha, you live in the United States and you order her jam, you order Sarah's jam off the internet and she just sends you a box of jam. You are just directly going to pay that 28.5%. Right? Like that, you're going to get your order come to your door. There's going to be this additional duty, and then you have to pay it. So then you have to decide, am I going to order Sarah's jam from Canada or someone else's jam from the United States, which might not be as expensive because you don't have to pay that extra 28.5%. Obviously, if you're going through some kind of intermediary, so let's say Sarah's selling her jams to a grocery store. That grocery store is essentially in the same position as Sarah was. So the grocery store is buying product from elsewhere in the world, and they might decide, hey, I like Sarah's jam. It's from Newfoundland. Newfoundland's awesome. They make the best jam. They're faced with the same thing. The jam is still costing us 28.5% more. So now we have to decide, do we increase the price of our jam for our customers, or do we absorb that in our profit margin? So they're faced with the same problem as Sarah is essentially. It's just compounded in this case because the inputs have been taxed. The product has been taxed twice at least. the inputs of the oranges have been taxed going across the border, and then it's been taxed again going back to them in the United States. Of course, if the US is imposing this 28.5% tariff, the US is collecting this money. Canada is not getting that money. Canada only received the 25% import tariff that they charged when the oranges crossed. Does that answer your question?
I do. Thank you.
Yeah.
So essentially, direct to consumer, there's no leeway around it. Direct to an intermediary or sales to an intermediary, they have that choice, like Sarah, to absorb it or pass it on.
They do. I mean, I don't think most, I think most businesses will pass it on. And then
Yeah.
of course the question is how much do they decide to pass it on? So, you know, they might
go
They
by
might-
10% and absorb part of it.
yeah. Or they
For
might
instance.
say, you know what, our average tariff is on all of our goods. If we're a grocery store and we say, well, most of our Canadian goods are getting an average of a higher margin, maybe 30 or 45%. So they might increase the jam price by 40%, even though really the jam only was just under 30% more. So it's a choice that those businesses have. And a choices that we have as businesses here in Newfoundland in Sarah's position, what we have to do if we're dealing with that particular supplier in the United States. It's not an easy choice. I'm not going to lie there. And there are a couple things we can do to try to get around it. But that usually means not buying our oranges from Florida. Hard in this case. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just going to ask a question. So wouldn't Sarah have a third choice? Like she could stop making orange jam.
Yes. Yeah. You're right. I do have a slide.
Blueberry jam,
Yeah.
like where she could get the local product, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And then on the other side, the US consumers might just stop buying Sarah's jam.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. They might say, you know what, we don't want the jam on our shelves to be 30% more because, you know, our customers aren't going to buy the jam at that much. We're going to find an alternate supplier. We're going to make a local producer of orange jam. And it'll be more than 30% cheaper because remember, oranges had to go cross once already. If the orange stays in the United States, goes to a third-party jam producer, they didn't have to pay that 25% import tariffs on the oranges and their inputs either. You know, they might have had, maybe they have another input from Canada. But you're right. This example here was kind of about how tariffs work. And if you're currently, you know, given a status quo on if things are going currently how they are. But of course, there's some choices that you have to try to avoid these tariffs or to kind of still do business competitively given the fact that these tariffs exist, which we can talk about as well really soon. And yeah, blueberry jam would be great. I've been looking, of course, maybe everyone's been looking at where our blueberries come from in the grocery store. I've been noticing a bit more that like we've got berries that come from Peru. I didn't know that our blueberries came from Peru. And so I've been buying Peruvian blueberries. So if we wanted to switch over to, making blueberry jam, that would be a really good idea. I'm going to really quickly just go through why the tariffs are being imposed, because I think we're probably going to want to have some more discussion on what we can do about them, sounds to be, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. So again, because there's always a bit of mixed feeling, some people, I think, again, don't realize that the tariffs that Canadian businesses are paying on goods are because of the tariffs that the Canadian government is imposing. And we kind of think like, well, that's not like our own government is doing this. I didn't realize that. But of course, excuse me, I'm really sorry. I'm going to go back. I hate jumping around. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to do it. Of course, the Canadian government is doing this in response to the US's here. So the US basically imposed this tariff first in this particular case. So if the United States has imposed this tariff first, Canada is saying like, well, wait a second. Now you're making all of our goods less competitive in the United States compared to your domestic ones. So we're going to do the same thing to your goods because it's not fair that this is just a one-way thing. So that's why we've called Canada's tariffs, our 25%, a retaliatory tariff, because this is in response to the United States saying, if you're going to tax our goods and make our goods less competitive, we're going to do the same to your goods. And that's why most people would say like it's really crappy that we've got these 25% tariffs that the Canadian government is imposing on our imports coming from the United States. But at the same time, we're not just going to sit there and let the United States tax all of our goods either. We've got to kind of respond to that somehow. And you can see that it is still at the point where it's escalating. Hopefully there can be some like resolution really soon. There have been smaller trade wars in the past that have been de-escalated. It hasn't happened quite to this degree before. So, I can't predict that future, but hopefully this is something that can get like resolved soon. So again, yes, Canada is imposing this tax, but some recent polls have said like 75% of businesses Canadian businesses are still in favor of that because again, it's a response to what the United States has been doing by taxing Canadian goods, and they did that first in this particular case. The Trump administration did.
So Billy, is that in a matter, back to that example, is okay, so you're imposing tax on Sarah, which means her customers in the States may not buy it.
Yeah.
So we're going to put the tax on your oranges because Sarah's probably going to go looking for oranges somewhere else and not buy US oranges. So
That's right.
it's if you're going to hurt our potential sales, we're going to hurt your potential sales. Is that kind of
Exactly.
okay? All right.
Yeah.
Kind of makes sense in my head now.
Yeah, it's retaliatory. And again, most people have been kind of in Canada, most businesses have been agreeing with it, at least 75% at this point. There's the latest poll that I saw it was a CBC article that was polling small business owners, mostly in Eastern Canada, I think. But yeah, not necessarily.
That speaks volumes, right? 3/4 of business owners are willing to pay more because it's the right response. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So this leads into a little bit about what I'm talking about here, like why the United States did it, why Canada has responded. So the Trump administration's justification, I also believe that a lot of American companies don't want these tariffs. It's just making business more expensive. So I've tried to be also very specific when I say like the Trump administration is asking for these tariffs because again, the trade relationships between Canada and the United States is complicated. It's very close. We're friends. We're just having an argument at this point in time, and it's mostly to do with a particular administration at this point. Of course, a country will impose tariffs to protect their own industries, right? They'll protect their own jobs and industries. So in our case of the oranges and the jam sales, essentially a tariff helps encourage local jam people in the United States to buy local jam rather than Sarah's jam from Canada. So and the same thing is happening, of course, in Canada. Oranges are a bad example, but it would be promoting. Canada would be promoting local industry that Sarah buy maybe blueberries or other inputs to her jam locally without tariffs instead of buying Florida oranges. The Trump administration doesn't like this idea of the trade deficit. We've talked a little bit about that it's kind of a complicated issue. And of course, they're saying that we want to reduce this trade deficit. Not exactly sure how they're going to do that or what impact that will have against the American economy. They're also citing national security concerns under Section 232 of their Trade Fairness Act. And so they're saying that, of course, they've talked about national security concerns around drugs and things like that moving across the border. And we're not exactly sure. I don't necessarily know a whole lot about that, but from what I understand, there's not a whole lot that's going across the border anyway. And so Canada's response has been retaliatory. So it's been basically, yeah, if you're imposing these tariffs, we're going to do the same thing. And we've talked a little bit about it already. And even though it hurts small businesses, 3/4 are saying, yeah, well, we have to because we're not going to do nothing. Meanwhile, our goods are less competitive in the United States. So impact on Canadians, essentially this causes a lot of things. So it can increase costs, as we said, our imports become more expensive. This is what most people understand. If we have higher imports for raw materials, this is going to be more expensive for us. We've also talked about that it makes our products less competitive in the United States because they're more expensive. So the United States might seek alternate suppliers for products that they once imported from Canada. Of course, these longer term contracts, trying to get stable prices for things. We don't know when tariffs are starting. We don't know when they're stopping. There's been some evidence to show that businesses have stockpiled things from the United States before the tariffs took place, so that people essentially bought more, before the tariffs took effect. This is leading to supply chain disruptions. We're not quite sure what kind of price we're going to secure, and it's just made the flow less predictable. So this is often a cost for businesses, and that uncertainty is never really that great. And of course, for consumer impact, we know that there can be a higher prices for end consumers and potential job losses there. So the impact isn't great, but of course, there's a couple of things that can be done. So there's a few people who have mentioned some alternate strategies here. Actually, before I say that, of course, if we look at Newfoundland and Labrador, we have a lot of our GDP obviously comes from the energy sector, which has been a little bit more shielded from US tariffs. We do have a high portion of our jobs go into retail trade, which I think we can see is being affected by tariffs. We also have a considerable tourism industry, which the impact of the tariffs is kind of mixed in my view. There will probably be some pressures going in either direction. So we know, and we're getting data to show that there has been an impact on Canadian travel to the United States based on these tariffs. There have been fewer people traveling to the United States. People have been canceling trips. People haven't been going across to do as much shopping and things like that. And so we're not exactly sure how this is going to shake out at this point. My view is a Canadian, let's say someone who lives in Ontario, if they're not going to the United States, well, maybe they're going somewhere else, or they're booking a travel to somewhere else. So maybe that's a domestic trip, or maybe that's another international trip. So for tourism providers here, obviously this it's still uncertain. We're not in tourism season here. We haven't had a tourism season in Newfoundland since these tariffs have been imposed. But I think that an upward pressure on tourism, or an upward pressure on increasing tourism, might be the fact that you get more Canadians traveling domestically than internationally to the United States. Obviously, it might also mean that we get fewer US and American travelers. To what degree, we're not exactly sure. I think that another point I want to make about the impact on Canadians is that it really depends on how long these tariffs last. And no one really knows that at this point. So obviously, if these tariffs are in the shorter term, the impact might not be as big. If they stay on longer term, that impact is going to be much, much wider felt. So it's a little bit hard to see that. But I do want to hear a little bit, what can be done. And I don't mean to like completely leave this on like a cliffhanger or anything like that, but I thought I could open this up a little bit more for discussion, and also to get any additional questions that you might have. So if we're local retailers or local tourism providers or service providers, what can be done to kind of avoid the situation that we've been seeing with the oranges and the orange example, to realize like, yeah, we're getting taxed twice. It's pretty easy to see that that's not a tenable situation for a jam producer in Canada. So I want to discuss that a little bit. And essentially we had Janice make one suggestion, like either switch what you can make or switch your supplier, which I think is one of the biggest and most obvious choices. But I'd like to hear what other people have to say about their thoughts on that, those strategies at first, or to ask questions about it.
I think you can also look for new markets. So if you're traditionally selling into the States, do you shift and look at Europe or other parts of Canada? You haven't touched on, Billy, the interprovincial barriers, but that's another strategy Canada's doing to try and allow goods and services to flow between provinces a little bit easier, which hopefully expands market a little bit. So I may not replace all my US customers, but I might be able to get into Western Canada or something that I didn't before. But then I've heard that that could also negatively impact some industries, because now they're competing with each other across Canada. So I don't know. It's all confusing.
It's a complicated picture there for sure. Yeah, we do have those internal or domestic trade barriers. I've done in my role here, I decided to do some research on the craft beer industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I've spoken with a lot of the craft beer producers here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and of course, the sale of alcohol was one of those funny trade barriers we've had between provinces, and so many of them are really interested to see what's going to happen with this, to see if we can actually help when they will often use the word exporting when referring to like exporting beer to like Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, not necessarily the United States. But you're right, it does open up to competition from other provinces in that particular case. However, it's hard to say this to existing, in the long run, generally falling trade barriers, the trade barriers that exist between provinces are causing some of the same problems as it would between Canada and the United States. The general consensus from like a trade perspective is falling trade barriers would be good in the long run. Even if in the short run there's some extra competition here and there, it's hard to say that. No, because in the short term it can be more difficult. But in the long-term perspective, usually it's better overall for the country to have these trade barriers fall.
Okay, interesting.
So I think you also said go to other markets, and that's kind of like the demand side of things about how you can do that. So of course you can go to other markets. I don't know if anyone here has had any experiences with that or thoughts with that about going to those other markets.
Thinking, Janice, for you, and as Billy touched on, we haven't hit the tourism season yet, but I would think you'd almost need to shift more to Canadian travelers, wouldn't you? Then think about who you're getting in from the States, potentially.
We're not quite sure what to think because we've actually had increases in American visitors over the past few years. And I think last year was probably our biggest increase in American visitors. So now we're wondering what's going to happen. But I know what did happen during COVID, once the province opened up, we had a lot of, and the Maritimes opened up, we had a lot of people traveling internally. So we're hopeful that maybe more Canadians will want to travel. But it really is a big question. And it affects how we are planning to stock the shop, because are we going to buy a lot of things that maybe are going to sit on the shelf? And so it's a big question for us right now. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no. Well, and I think the other side of it, which I guess is the variable that Billy alluded to, Canadians aren't going to the US, but we don't know if Americans are going to stop coming to Canada.
Well, that's it. The American dollar, I mean,
Exactly.
the American dollar is so good right now, might be, some incentive, but
Yeah.
I just don't know. And I think the cross-border thing, people stopping going across the border, isn't necessarily because of the tariffs either. I mean, I think there's a lot of security concerns that people now have. Do I really want to go into the United States? And I don't know, Americans might not want to come here because they think we don't like them anymore. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and the dollar in reverse, as you said. I mean, my dollar's not going to get me very much in the States right now.
No.
Yeah. Terry Lynn, can I put you on the spot for a moment? In the agriculture industry, I know that one of the biggest challenges is the cost of inputs. Traditionally, are most of your inputs Canadian, or do inputs come from the States as well?
Speaking personally, ours are, I would say, 98% Canadian. Like my seed suppliers are all Canadian, and we've been doing that for years. We've never ordered from the States. And our fertilizer here on our farm, we use mostly natural fertilizers because we do all of our own composting with our manure management program. I know that some of the larger farms, the dairy farmers, the crop, the forage growers here in Canada, you know, they have some concerns, and the Federation of Agriculture is sort of navigating through those waters for them.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And for the little bit maybe that we do order from the States, you know, we're just looking at alternatives now. We've just been spending a lot of time looking for alternatives. This year, specifically last week, I was looking for one type of seed for a shepherd pepper. It's a request for a customer, and as some of you know, I tend to go over the top for my customers. So I started looking for this seed, which is a really expensive seed. And originally I couldn't get it from one of my Canadian suppliers. I found a place in the United States, and the cost was just atrocious, just for the shipping alone for 1 ounce of seed. So I scratched that, finally did a bit more research, found somebody in Canada that sells them. And so this year I can honestly say 100% of our seed supply comes from Canadian suppliers. So that's awesome.
I would think, Billy, in the business that you're co-owner of, given that it's in the medical field, there's probably not as many options when you're looking at specialized equipment. I think there was a news article last night. You know, oranges, sure, I can go perhaps another country that has tropics and can grow those. But if you have a product or an input that's needed that's very high caliber, very specific, may not be as easy to find another source.
Yeah. So the business that I'm in is a dental office, and so it's really tough. So on the one hand, it's hard to find those supplies. The Canadian market for medical equipment is very small compared to the United States. It is a drop in the bucket for the United States, and so there's not a whole lot of Canadian manufacturers or distributors or anything like that. Then the flip side, I'm in a type of business which some of you might also be in. I'm thinking of, like, especially service-based businesses where it's like, okay, that's great, find international markets. Well, we're not traveling to Denmark to give someone a filling, right? It's all happening here. Like, we can't find international markets to do this kind of thing. And so it is a bit of a problem because it's essentially a situation where we have to try to absorb that as much as possible. Also, given the fact that there's guidelines on the prices that you should charge for medical services and things like that.
That's true too.
So it does. So we're particularly in a tough spot in some ways. Supplies are not necessarily the biggest, a huge percentage of the cost for when you go to the dentist. Usually it's labor, but I can understand the position that some people are in when they say, great, find another supplier. That's hard. Great, find an international market. Can't do that. I do appreciate that situation as well, and then that's really tough. We haven't begun looking too much, for example, for other international suppliers, but if things continue or get worse, that's probably something that we would have to do to see if they can get the equipment elsewhere. But it's also a situation where you need the equipment, the supplies. You don't want to compromise on the quality of those supplies either, right? It's a very important that they're that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to comment a little bit on the tourism thing. This is me getting away from, like, I'm using some data to speculate on what could happen from the tourism side. Where, of course, Canadians and US are very, very patriotic people, and we can kind of see the rallying around by Canada, and the movement for that has been much, much stronger in Canada, from what I can tell, than in the United States. The percentage of trade versus GDP that's happening here. So the percentage of goods that the US is depending on Canada for as a percentage of their GDP is much smaller than vice versa, right? So Canada is depending, a much larger portion of our GDP is kind of related to trade with the United States. And so it does, in a way, affect us a lot more than the United States, which is why the response kind of, I won't say like emotionally, maybe like behaviorally, has been different for Canadians. I would tend to speculate then, using that, and also the fact that I think one of the challenges, but also the really nice parts about Newfoundland and Newfoundland tourism, is that nobody comes here by accident, right? It's a very planned trip for many people. It's a bucket list trip, and it's not necessarily cheap to get here. It's a lot cheaper to go anywhere else in Canada almost, and not maybe not far north, of course. But it's a very purposeful trip, and I know that for many of the really profitable tourism industries, some of the market is a little bit less price sensitive. So I would speculate that the effect of the kind of anti-Canadian sentiment and not the travel for Americans to Canada may not see as big of an impact as Canadians travel to the United States. So again, that is me just speculating on a couple of those, we'll call it like data points or assumptions there. But that's totally a prediction, speculation. It's yet to be seen as we get into our larger tour, as we get into our tourism season here.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's as much of a anti-Canadian sentiment out of the States as there is an anti-US sentiment out of Canada.
Yeah, that's essentially what I'm saying. And I think the market that comes to Canada is also less price sensitive. Like when you have lots of people doing adventure tourism, lots of people doing things like hunting and fishing in the fall. These trips have they're big dollar trips, right? And so I think and oftentimes again it's a bucket list trip. And so I think you see less price sensitivity as well.
Fair. All right, so we can absorb the extra tariff costs. We can look for a new market. We could look for new suppliers so we can avoid the tariffs potentially. We can change what we sell or do. That's what I'm picking up of all this conversation of things we could do.
I've also thought that I mean, there are strategic ways to increase your prices as well. Like it's not just trying to increase prices to your own domestic consumers, excuse me, across the board. I think there are there's lots of pricing strategies, which I haven't really gotten into in like a particular presentation around things like if you want to unbundle things, if there's particular customer segments that you know might be okay with paying more, or if you think that there might be some customer segments or particular types of customers that you want to pay more, or you think can't handle it. You can be a bit more strategic about how you do this. Maybe there's a loyalty program or things like that you can impose, so that being a loyal customer and that loyalty kind of gets rewarded with more like status quo pricing or things like that. Obviously, not every business is positioned to do that. This is where we kind of get into the specifics of every particular type of industry and how they work. Again, dental office, there's not going to be a loyalty program. Usually we'll see you in 6 months and we hope that you do come back type of thing. But so I understand that these strategies may not work, but I think that increasing the prices doesn't necessarily also have to mean you are increasing the prices of everything that you sell. Maybe there are certain ways you can do that to try and soften the blow for your most loyal customers, for example, or more profitable ones and things like that. If you're in that situation.
An interesting thought too. Are services tariffed the same way, or is it just goods, Billy?
Most of these tariffs right now are on manufactured goods.
Okay.
Yeah.
Billy, back to Sarah. I mean, would it be a wise thing for her to say, okay, I'll just, for this year, I will take my cut in my profits, hoping it will blow over? Or should she just go right into increasing her prices? I guess that depends on her, but I mean, I can see people just holding on for a bit. Well, I'll just take a little bit of a loss and hope this all blows over because I don't want to lose my customers. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is complicated.
It's a tough one. Of course, this is where some of the uncertainty comes into the play, because you could also say the same thing about your suppliers, right? Like, do I stick with my U.S. supplier in the hope that this would blow over?
Yeah.
This all stems back to the question about how long are the tariffs going to last, right? And I wish I knew that, but I don't. So I think you're right. I think in some cases people are going to say, well, let me just try this for a little bit. I'll hold on for as long as I can. Maybe even to my more loyal customers or my more profitable ones, I'll communicate this to them, and I'll say, look, you have tariffs, or you have probably some goods impacting you, tariffs. I have the same thing. I'm going to try my best to keep my prices consistent for the next little bit, but maybe even communicate that and tell them, like, if this like lasts a lot longer, I'm not really making much money on these products, and I'm going to have to increase these prices. So I think probably communicating that, especially to again, depending on the business, if you're B2B, taking your best accounts and talking to them about that. If you're B2C, maybe discussing this, a little bit with like consumers, and you can probably put that again, that like buy Canadian spin on things to try to ease that kind of medicine a little bit, or ease the swallowing of that medicine a little bit. But yeah, maybe communicating that a little bit could also be good, depending on who your audience is and how you think that who your customers are and how you think they would react. That's the situation we're in my particular business. It's kind of like, let's hold on here because we don't really have any other options. Not increasing prices or anything like that. We're just gonna see how this goes, and hopefully it blows over soon. Again, from a speculatory standpoint, I don't think it's going to be that long. I don't think it would go into like 2026, say, but I really don't know. That's again coming from a guess. I think the costs to the Americans are great enough. I think the only other cards that they might have to play would be higher energy tariffs, which would increase inflation considerably through gasoline prices. And I don't think it's just been a very smart move overall. And I think the Trump administration at some point is going to have to walk them back and claim that there was some sort of victory of some kind without trying to hold them for too long. But I don't know that for sure. That's, again, purely a prediction. I could be wrong.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments for Billy? I think this has been fascinating myself. I've really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'd love to hear more questions if you have them. Oh, am I still sharing my screen? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I've been looking. I've got two screens, so I've been able to see everybody. I don't even know if you've been able to see me. I'm bad.
We have.
So, okay, good.
And you're looking at the right camera, so it's okay.
Yeah. I have had a little experience, but some experience with kind of like through the Canadian, like the Trade Commission. Oftentimes this can be about finding other buyers in different markets. I recently did a trip to Iceland, learning about their fishery, actually, about how they use different parts of the fish to make other products instead of just like throwing it away. And we met with one of the trade commissioners there, who was based out of the embassy in Reykjavik. Now, Iceland is a small country. It's, as we know, it's pretty much the size of Newfoundland in many ways. They were very knowledgeable about all of the business going on in and around Iceland. And I was really impressed with the connections they had made, who they know. They were a really smart, hardworking person. And because I think I took that for granted maybe before, but after having met this person and talking to them, and they helped set us up with all kinds of different people to talk to while we were on this trip. So I think going through the trade, different types of trade consulates would be really useful at trying to, if you're in the position where you're selling now to the US market, but you want to get connected to buyers in other markets. I think they're a really valuable tool at trying to help you kind of dip your toes in those markets or explore whether or not they'd be really good opportunities. So I know it's a government-based support, but I was quite impressed with how connected they were and how helpful they were. And these are people who are usually based in the embassy or near the embassy in a new market. So I would reach out to those.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a little plug for Enlo. They've got an export. Deborah Yowden is an export consultant for them, and they've done Janice and I have both been in a trade workshop, and I used it similar to your craft beer folks. I wanted to export to Atlantic Canada. So, she called it the soft export. And so I didn't have to worry so much about trade barriers and things, but the concept of even developing the new market and who's your ideal customer and what's your value proposition and, all those things that you would do to export to a different country still apply if you're looking to expand within the Canadian market as well. So I think there's some value in kind of putting that export hat on, even if export doesn't mean international export. But putting yourself in that mind space, I know it certainly helped me try to think about that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I put 2 links in the chat here that are somewhat related. So I've got a link to just the General Trade Commissioner Service website there. So they've got a bunch of different offices around the world. I also put a link, something that is also I found pretty interesting is there's an Atlantic Canadian Export Accelerator Program as well. So they basically take businesses or startups. This would probably be really useful also for anyone who's kind of in that support role, or if you are a startup and you want to grow. But if you're in that support role, there is these Atlantic Incubator and an Accelerator Program. Or they're calling it an Incubator Program. Sorry. That they take Atlantic Canadian businesses in and try to really kind of run them through some really rigorous steps to get them ready to export their products elsewhere.
Cool.
I'm sure the program is a buzz because of these tariffs, but there's probably some discussions on how to not necessarily go to the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
So that might be something to look at. I will put one more link in there because sometimes people are trying to do some kind of initial research on markets, and there is a country and economic information tab under Export Development Canada, which is kind of interesting if people are trying to look at potential new markets.
Okay.
But I would really encourage you to reach out to the trade commissioner. They're really, I think they're hardworking people, and they know they're over in these markets, and they would be more than willing to help Canadian businesses find customers in these other markets as well, or connect you with possible customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Billy. Taking a look at the time, I want to throw back to the group. Calvin, welcome. You were dropping in and out, I think, when we were doing introductions, so we didn't get a chance to kind of meet you. If you want to say a quick hello and let folks know who you are and where you are, if you're there.
Yep. Yeah. Actually, I had to change computers.
Okay.
Calvin Efford. I'm in Port Blandford and involved with a lot of things around this area, but in particular today I signed in as a CBDC board of director.
Excellent. Thank you. Another good support agency for supporting small businesses. Fantastic. Thank you. Billy, you've got an event coming up tomorrow night with Navigate. If you want to let folks know about your pitch night.
Oh, great, thanks. Yeah, so Navigate developed 2 pilot programs that we ran over the winter here. One program we called Summit, where we basically put a call out to entrepreneurs who were working full-time on their businesses and that had some potential for some high growth or high community impact. And we paid them $5,000 cash to give them some kind of like grocery money to take part in the program. And they worked full-time, and it was really intense for 12 weeks. And we are essentially getting them to pitch their businesses. We call it like a demo day. Some of them do have asks. Some of them are looking for funders. Some of them are looking for partners. Some of them are looking for customers. So they're pitching their ideas tomorrow at the Rotary Arts Center in Corner Brook from 5:30 to 7:30. I could put up the registration link. I didn't have it out in front of me here, but I would find it.
Okay. Awesome.
Hang on. So we have essentially at 5:30, people will show up and say hello to one another. We'll fairly quickly move into the theater itself. There are going to be, you'll see myself, I'll introduce everybody. There's going to be 4 pitches around 5 to 8 minutes each. We can ask a few questions in the audience, and then afterwards we'll have finger foods, and there'll be like a cash bar. And so you can have a chance to like meet these entrepreneurs. And this is something we've met yesterday as the Navigate staff to see what went well, what we could improve. So we want to continue offering this summit program. The other one I mentioned is a base camp program, which was a shorter duration, 8 weeks, not necessarily for full-time entrepreneurs, but was aimed at providing some structured coaching for people who had a business idea, but in their words might be like, I wasn't sure if it's going to work, or wasn't sure if I should start or how I'd go about starting. And so it was aimed at earlier stage entrepreneurs. So the earlier stage program is called Base Camp. The one taking place tomorrow is called the Summit.
Excellent. Awesome. Terry Lynn, a sure sign of spring. You're starting to advertise your spring camps, even though the snow's falling out there now, but
Yeah, I'm ignoring the snow because I'm inside sorting seeds that are already starting to go into my starter tray. So inside my house, it's spring in my mind.
there you go. But do you have, I saw that you're possibly putting on some extra spaces for Easter camps.
Our Easter toddler camp is our toddler programs themselves are probably one of our most popular children's programs. And so our Easter program, we had 4 sessions and they sold out very quickly. And I have a good wait list. So I decided after a lot of pressure, I would do an extra one. And we've already released our summer dates as well. We have 10 dates for summer that are probably 3/4 of the way sold out as well.
Nice.
And what's fabulous is we got a registration yesterday from Nunavut. So that's wonderful.
Cool. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it's gearing up to be a busy summer.
For sure. Carla, do you want to talk about the NLO conference coming up?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi there. Thanks, Carol. Yes, our signature annual conference coming up April 10th and 11th in St. John's. We just released the conference agenda. So if you want to pop over to our website, you can see all that there. Or if you follow us on social media channels, it was posted yesterday. Great lineup, lots of activities, all kinds of fun things happening. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. Crystal, what's happening in Gander? Anything you want to promote or share and let us know about?
Well, I guess I can speak to Central Minex is coming up now in May. So that's a big thing for Chamber here in Gander and the mining industry that is slowly putting together. So that's an event that we have on the go up from the Chamber's point of view. And we have our annual general meeting, and that's also now in April. So that'll be a big event. And then as for my own personal Excite Zone, we are hoping for a good summer. We had just went through a really nice winter. It was our best one yet. So finally, the pressures of COVID and people moving around, our island has come back around. So if anybody has any little ones that are traveling with them over the summer and you guys pass by Gander, you're welcome to drop in and stretch your legs.
Burn off some energy.
Yeah.
There you go.
So-
Excellent. Thank you. And we're glad you joined us today.
No, thank you.
Kelly, you got Thursday trivias. You got trivia tonight?
I have trivia tonight, and on April 5th, we're doing a murder mystery ladies' night with Pasadena Ski and Nature Park.
Oh, cool.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. Apparently sold out, so exciting but scary at the same time.
Excellent. Anything else coming up?
working with the cafe right now. We're going to do a couple, I think we're going to have a couple Easter sessions with the escape boxes. Going to do like an afternoon for teenagers and then an evening one. And a couple other things on the horizon, but nothing set in stone quite yet. Spring coming up, I've got a couple requests for fairy garden workshops and things like that. So
Awesome. Excellent. Janice, are you looking to open up in May again? Is that your, I think it's your normal
yes.
start?
Yeah, we usually open up for Mother's Day, and I think we'll be part-time on weekends only for the month of May, and then we'll be every day until October the 15th. So we're starting to look at what we need, what stock we need to increase, and a few new suppliers. As I said, we're not sure, how busy we're going to be this summer, but we're going to be optimistic, and it'll be fun to get back in.
There you go. Excellent. All right, 1 minute to go. So thank you very, very much, Billy, for the insightful information. Great discussion. As always, folks, if you have a suggestion, this suggestion came from you, the community. If you have a suggestion for a future session, please let me know. And keep your eyes out for the recording if you want to go back and look at anything. I will have it posted most likely later today. And stay tuned for a date in April. I haven't booked a date yet for coffee break yet. Often it depends on when my guests are available, if we're having a guest. So I'll be working on that shortly. And that's it. We are at time. So thank you very, very much, everyone. Thanks again, Billy, and wish you all a great day.
Thank you.
thanks, Carol.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Would you mind staying on,
Bye.
Carol?
Yep, I can